Welcome to Chapter 7 of Marketing Management. And this chapter, we're going to be covering segmentation, target marketing and positioning, building the right relationships with the right customers. So our case study is Procter& Gamble. And I think Procter& Gamble is a good one for us to have as our case study because they have so many products that they make, right? Procter and Gamble makes such a wide variety of household names, and a lot of those products are targeted at very different groups of consumers, sometimes in the same product category. So sometimes you may find that they have two, three, four, five, six lines of detergents, and each one has different product characteristics and different target markets that they're going after, hence the different product characteristics. So they're a very good example of a company that has been successful with different segmentation strategies. So we're going to talk a little bit more throughout the chapter. I'll give examples of how they have really been able to adapt and change their product line depending on who they want to target. So when we think of segmentation and targeting and positioning, these all go hand in hand. But the idea is that first of all, you have to segment your market. And I think I mentioned that I worked with a number of small businesses and non-for-profits. And this is the area that they struggle the most in. Why? Because a lot of times I would talk to a non-profit and say, okay, tell me who your audience is. And they would say, well, we're trying to target anyone who wants to give us money for a non-profit. Or we're trying to target all women. I was just working with a small business out of Colombia. They told me they just want people to come to Colombia. They don't care where they come from. How are you going to reach people everywhere in the world to come to Colombia? How are you going to reach all kinds of people everywhere in the world? It makes no sense. Or how are you going to target all donors everywhere to give your organization money as a nonprofit? That makes no sense. You have to distill who your audience is if you want to be successful. And the more you are able to distill this audience, the more successful you're going to be. So this is really such a key area of marketing, that ability to segment, then target, then position your product in the minds of the consumer in a correct way. So let's start off with segmentation. Segmentation calls on us to come up with identify the correct basis for segmentation. And there's so many bases, we're going to get into that a bit. Then once you've figured out all the various different places that you could possibly get a market from, then you distill it and find one or two that you really want to go after. And lastly, once you figure out who that target market is, then you come up with a positioning that is going to be effective for those folks. So let's start with segmentation. There are four main ways of how you may segment a market: geographical, demographic, psychographic, and behavioral. So let's start with geographic. When we think of geographic, we're thinking of a geographical space that our audience is going to come from. Again, remember, the more we distill, the better off for us. So you may say North America, but it's going to be better to say California and then Stockton and then north of Stockton or central Stockton or south side of Stockton, right? The more you can distill a market, the more likely you're going to be successful with that market. And I think this is a very general area where small businesses in particular often are challenged. So demographic segmentation is another popular one. And when we think of demographic segmentation, that's age, gender, size of family, family life cycle. And what is family life cycle? I talked about this a little bit in the previous chapter. When I was doing my PhD and single, I had different patterns of buying behavior than now married with two kids, right? My parents have different patterns of behavior to me, and those are related to age and where they are in life. When you just get married, your buying patterns are different from when you have kids. If you are single and you're a home empty nester, your patterns of buying is different from if you were a teenager. So family life cycle in terms of where you are in your life is important. Then of course we know income. People who are at particular different income brackets purchase in very, very different ways. We're talking about occupation, people who fall into certain categories. Maybe you might buy, maybe you're looking at people who buy scrubs. So you're looking at nurses or people who work in hospitals. Or maybe you're focused on people who are of a certain race and ethnicity, or of a particular generation. I always joke and say, before baby boomers, who knew that there were so many erectile dysfunction ads out there, right? So the idea is that there are many companies that focus on demographic segmentation. TikTok. Now there are a lot of families that do TikTok together, but TikTok is primarily focused on a younger generation, as is Snapchat, right? My students tell me all the time, Facebook is for old people, and so even when we talk about social media, they will segment their market very, very different based on demographic information, and so when we think of behavioral, that's also a very different type of segmentation. You have occasions. So some companies, they do a lot of their segmentation around, time of year. So maybe New Year's, or they're gonna sell you snow tires, or maybe they're going to try to focus on selling timeshares for summer vacations, right? So there are a lot of occasions we goodness gracious, we buy cards for, Hallmark is certainly on occasion segmentation, right? From Valentine's to Christmas to Mother's Day, Father's Day, you name it. Then their behavioral segmentations can look at benefits sought. So, what are the benefits from buying this? That it's we're looking at price as a possible benefit, or we're looking at quality or durability as a possible benefits. Then you also have user status. Are you a current user? Have you stopped buying this product for a while and now you've returned? And then user rates. Are you a user who buys frequently, or you're a user that buys infrequently? And then you have loyalty status. Are you a very loyal user? This is the only people that you buy from. Or do you not really buy from this? This is the first time. Readiness. How ready are you to buy? We talked about in chapter 5 the consumer decision making process, right? So if you are just at the beginning with need recognition versus if you're at the end with you are focused on, you're just about ready to buy, then that's very, very different. And then we can also segment based on attitude towards the product, right? What is our attitude towards the product? Do we have a positive attitude or a negative attitude? So I think when we are looking at segmentation, it's so important for us to recognize that we have to be clear on how we want to segment the market. Psychographic segmentation is also very important, because psychographic segmentation, think of it as a blend between personality and demographics. So active lifestyle, that's a psychographic segmentation. People who are outdoor folks, right? People who like to run and jog and do outdoor sports, that's a psychographic segmentation. People who like to do what would be an example? People who like to do certain hobbies, like knitters, that's a segmentation, a psychographic segmentation. So I think you have to recognize all of these different ways that you could segment a market. One of the exercises that I do typically when I have a class of students and we're in classroom is I ask them to think about Victoria's Secrets. And then I will ask one of the guys to come down and name different types of underwear that he could possibly buy his girlfriend at Victoria's Secret. Of course, guys are always very shy about this, and it's a good fun exercise where we all get a good laugh. But often girls have a wider vocabulary when it comes to underwear. Of course, we would expect that in both male and female underwear. As it turns out, women buy men's underwear more than men buy men's underwear. Women buy it for men. But I asked them to do this exercise because a lot of times they will name all these different, whether it's, boy shorts, or it's bikinis, or it's T-string, or it's thongs, or whatever it is. And granny panties even. And then I say, do you think all women wear all of these different types of underwear? And do you think there are any segments that we haven't talked about? And then everybody kind of thinks about it. And I say, what about edibles? Is Victoria's Secret making any kind of edible underwear? Or are they making underwear that are crotchless? No, they're not doing any of these things, because that is a market that's much more Fredericks of Hollywood than it is Victoria's Secret, right? And so in the same vein, I don't think Victoria's Secret is also making granny panties because that's not their niche market either. They are trying to bring sexy back. So the idea is based on who your audience is and what it is you're trying to do, then you're going to have very different segmentation. So Victoria's Secret typically will segment based on psychographics, right? They are looking at people who really want to use to buy sexy underwear. And so, no, they are not going to be selling granny panties. But at the same time, they're not very risque. So, they're not going to be selling crotchless panties. They're not going to be selling edibles because that's not the kind of brand that they are. And so, how are they segmenting their market? They're probably segmenting their market based on psychographics. And they recognize that their market is very different from other underwear manufacturers. Okay. And so you have to think about that. It's a fun exercise. Everybody gets a kick out of it. And then we go back to our seats. But I really like it because it forces us to recognize that even though Victoria's Secret is an underwear company, there are types of underwear that they would never make, that they are not interested in making, that might be profitable if they were to make, but they're still not making it because it doesn't make sense for who they are and what they're about. So when you are thinking about how you're going to segment your market, you always have to think about these five variables. What is the size? Is it a big market? Is it a small market? Can your audience, do they have strong purchasing power? What is the profile of the segment? Then you have to think about how accessible it is. Can you reach this audience? Because you might have an audience and you're based in Stockton, California, and there's a potential audience in Russia, St. Petersburg. The question you have to ask yourself is, can you reach that audience? Or by the time you reach that audience, it's going to be too expensive. You're not going to be able to sell your product at a competitive rate. Then you have to think about, do you have a large enough, profitable enough audience? So are they substantial in size? Can you differentiate between your audience and another audience? So we talked about Fredericks of Hollywood. So of course, Victoria's Secret can distinguish themselves from Fredericks of Hollywood, and so that's key to them understanding why they wouldn't want to go after that segment. What about actionable? Do you have the resources to go after this audience? Because if you pick an audience that's too big for your bridges, then you're not gonna it's gonna be too big for you. And if you pick an audience that is too small or it doesn't make sense, then why would you want to do that? So the idea is you have to think about if it's actionable. Now, when once we decide, okay, these are the possible pots, think of it as pots of buyers. Once we come up with a target market, we often will take a bit from each pot. So when I ask you to do a target market profile, you're typically going to talk about maybe two or three bases for segmentation. So you would say, I want women, so that's gender, ages 35 to 55, that's age, who work in tech, that's occupation, who are really into the outdoor life, that's psychographic, who buy exercise equipment, you know, once or twice a month, then that's behavioral, right? And so you really want to distill your target market as much as possible because then that helps you to reach them most effectively. You also want to think about anytime you're going after a particular segment or market, what's the level of competition? Can you, because this market might be really good for you, but there are about 15 players existing in a market, makes no sense to go into that market. It's too competitive. You're not going to be able to make money. So you have to consider level of competition. You have to consider level of, substitutes that are out there. So are you the only major player in terms of what you are selling, or 10, 15, 20 different people are selling what you're selling? So you have to think about that. Power of buyers. Now, what do I mean by that? So, if you think of a retailer like Walmart, they're a very strong and powerful buyer. And buyers tend to be more powerful now than suppliers. There was a day when manufacturers are king, working. I think that now it really is about the retailer. because Walmart and Target, they run things, right? And I had a friend who had said to me, they sold flowers. He worked for a flower business, cut flowers, fresh flowers. And they were trying to get into Walmart, and Walmart just ran them through the ringer in order to cut their prices as low as possible before they would let them into their stores. So you have to always think about what is the power of the buyers and what are the power of the suppliers. We all use cell phones, and in all cell phones, there's kind of some raw minerals that you only can get from China. And so, in that perspective, China's a very, very powerful supplier in that particular market. You also have to think about, what are your objectives? What is it you're trying to achieve? Do you need dominance in the market? Or do you just need the market is so big and so profitable? If you just hold this little corner, you'd be successful. So I want you to kind of think about that and think about, given all of those things, what market would be most beneficial for you to go after. The other thing that I think you have to always think about is, the cultural aspect of things. Um, in in 2025, California is going to be a majority brown state. By 2050, the United States is going to be a majority brown country. I know that's frightening people as we speak, but the reality is we are moving towards such a diverse set of buyers that we have to be aware of diverse needs, wants, um, and interest. And so, I remember having this discussion with a friend of mine who's running a Latino advertising agency, and he was saying to me that people often go after consumers without a very clear understanding of the consumers. He was saying that a lot of, his customers will say, "Oh, Lewis, I want to get a Spanish ad. I want to run an ad in a Spanish newspaper or on a Spanish radio station, and I want a complete ad in Espanol." And he will say, "Does anyone in your store or in your business speak Spanish?" And they will look at him with a blank expression and say, "No." And he's like, "So why are you trying to attract Spanish speakers if no one in your store speaks Spanish? Who are they going to speak to?" You're giving the impression that when they come into the store that there will be somebody there who can speak Spanish to them. So I think a lot of times we really don't always think it through in terms of who we want to go after. Sometimes we think things are popular, and we want to go after them, but we don't really think about our capabilities and our resources. The other thing sometimes you have to think about, is there a target market that I'm totally ignoring, right? For example, talking about Latinos and Latinx community. Right now in the United States of America, the Latino community is the fastest growing community when it comes to moviegoers. But how many movies are created with Latinos and Latinx community in mind? Very few, right? And so I think that is as a result of a lack of diversity in Hollywood at key areas, a lack of diversity in key advertising and marketing firms. And so people don't tend to really understand these markets very well. And that is also part of the problem. That when you pick a market that you think is attractive, you have to really make sure you understand the market, right? You have to understand the market, or it's really a waste of time to go after a market that is foreign to you. And as I said before, you have to really also think about who your audience is, who the competitors are. Are the competitors going after this audience? What has become a very popular trend now is this idea of socially responsible targeting. And here, what we do is that we have now, back in the day, let's say we're talking about the 50s, a lot of firms really had predatory practices of who they were going after. If you look at cigarette ads, for example, a lot of that was geared with cartoons and fun colors. They were gearing it towards kids. Similarly, we find with the vaping situation and with all these jewels and so forth and so on, that's geared towards young adults. I mean, their entire campaign for Jewel was on social media. Think Snapchat and Instagram. And they made the actual device look like a thumb drive. So you have to be careful as an organization because the government will come after you if they think that you are going after inappropriate audiences, underage audiences, and people may say, well, we're not targeting those consumers, and yet all of their marketing materials suggest otherwise. So you always have to be careful about, being socially responsible when it comes to target marketing. Let's switch a little bit and talk about positioning. So, positioning is the place that a product occupies in the minds of the consumer. And it is so important to understand what positioning you currently have and what positioning you aspire to have. So, because what it means is that when you know and understand that, you know what changes you have to make. Sometimes companies would have started off with one positioning and have evolved into another group of, and so their customers have changed over time. Sometimes that can happen without you even realizing it. Levi's, that happened to them, where literally their consumer segment died off. And so because they had not been actively wooing and enticing a new segment, they literally lost all their customers overnight. And Gap, who was really very proactive about going after a younger generation, took over as the number one jeans brand in America. So you have to think about what your positioning is, and then based on what your positioning is, who do you want to target and what components in your product do you want to have to match who you want to target. Because if I'm trying to target young people, why would I have things that are attractive to older folks, right? So you always have to think about how you're differentiating yourself from the competition. And are you using things that make sense for who your audience is? A lot of times too, when you're positioning yourself, you have to think about what's the unique selling proposition. What is it that I do better, faster? Um, what am I better known for? What products do I have a better quality in? What is my unique selling proposition? What do people think I just excel at? And so you have to be able, once you have to figure that out. And then once you figure that out, you have to be able to communicate it very succinctly, right? And you want to think about how you're going to message that out. What components of that? And I'll give you an example. Kia and Hyundai, when they were coming to the American market, knew that they weren't going to be the most reliable brand because Toyota had basically cornered that market. And if someone didn't buy a Toyota, then they were going to buy a Nissan, right? They certainly were not going, and these are all they were going to look for a Japanese brand. Certainly Hyundai and Kia were from South Korea, so that wasn't going to be the brand they go after. Then they didn't think, they're not in the they're not a well-known name, so we're not talking about Audi or BMW or Mercedes, but they felt that they needed to kind of carve a niche for themselves, so they came up with this idea of affordable luxury. It just didn't exist before Kia and Hyundai. Either you had affordability, Toyota, Nissan, or you had luxury, Audi, Mercedes, BMW. You did not try to blend the two. And when they came out, it was, at first it was laughable to people because people were like, they are comparing themselves to Mercedes Benz. I mean, at what price point? It makes no sense. But now in 2020, Kia and Hyundai are doing very, very well. And they created a brand new category called affordable luxury. And if you look at a Kia or a Hyundai and you sit in the car, they have all kinds of features that you will not find in any other car at that price point. And that's made them very, very attractive to their consumers. So you have to think about, based on your unique characteristics, what would make yourself very attractive to your consumers? And sometimes, you come up with unique things. Costco, if you think back in the day, who would pay a membership to shop at a store? I mean, the store needs to pay me because I'm coming to shop there. Or when the idea of Netflix first came out, it was laughable to people like Blockbuster and Hollywood Video because they're like, who would pay a subscription? One price. Now, granted, when Netflix first came on board, their subscription was like $40. Nobody is going to pay that right now. But the idea is they did not see the value in coming up with a unique, innovative way of positioning yourself. And so, we always have to think about new and innovative ways to position and consumers, and then find consumers who would appreciate that innovation. And then we have to find a way to communicate it. That's the last piece, right? So you have to think about what the market wants. Always our segment is at the center of what we're thinking about. Then you're thinking about, based on who my target market is, how can I build this product or this service that suits their needs? And then think about, okay, how can I position it? How can I communicate to them how this particular product goes above and beyond what other options are? And so that they can, when they think of my product, do they think of more for the same, more for less, the same for less? So you might be saying more for more. What does that mean? Nostrum, right? That you're going to pay more when you shop at Nordstrom, but you're certainly going to get more when you shop at Nordstrom. Less for less, or less for much less, the dollar store, right? So I'm going to pay less, but I'm also going to get less, because every time I go into the dollar store, I'm like, why am I here? Because they have one cash register open, two maximum, and a whole bunch of people in line, right? So you're paying less, but you get much less. More for the same. Maybe Macy's might say, for the same price that you would pay somewhere else, you get more here. I don't think really Macy's can use that. But maybe it would be a department store that would see the same price that you pay at the other department store, but you get more here. More for less. TJ Maxx, Ross, Home Goods, that's their motto. That's their slogan, more for less. So when we're thinking about segmenting, remember we talk about finding the right audience, figuring out where you can get the pots of possible buyers, picking, little bits from each pot and coming up with the right kind of target market, coming up with a product that meets the needs of that target market, then crafting the right messaging, figuring how you can position it in the minds of the consumer, and then delivering on that. Okay, that's it for our chapter, and I see you in chapter 8.